Good morning, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. I'm Tim Anderson, the Appraiser's Advocate, and we're here this morning with Jeff Morley. Now, Jeff is a name that you most likely know. He's deeply involved with the Appraisal Institute, with the National Association of Appraisers. He's been on the Utah board. He's worked with the AQB and the ASB. He's on various committees, various places. He'll be speaking in upcoming conferences. So you'll be getting to know Jeff, and I hope you take that opportunity because he's also just a fine gentleman. And Jeff and I and our families have known each other for a number of years. So, Jeff, tell us what's going on professionally. What occupies a great deal of your time, and then we'll get into the two questions we talked about earlier before we went on the air.
Yeah, you bet. Well, Tim, it's a pleasure to be here with you as always, and appreciate the kind setup. In maybe my condolences to those that have met me or will yet. Just a forewarning: I'm not nearly as impressive as Tim, might make me sound. But that said, well, there really is a lot, going on. We've got a lot of technological changes, which we'll get to. Certainly, the way residential appraisers are writing reports, reporting format is I think really hitting home in the moment. There are a couple of things going on, and all of these are related. One of them is the AQB. And you mentioned, some involvement that I've had. I'm on the board of trustees with the Appraisal Foundation, and so have some interaction with both the qualifications board and the standards board. The AQB just announced that they're extending their time period for public comments on the exposure draft that they have, talking about what should it take to become one of us, an appraiser. And just continue to encourage anybody who's got perspectives on that to submit those comments to the AQB. I do a little humble podcast. If nothing else, it probably just makes you look even smarter by comparison, Tim. So you're welcome for that lift. But but we had somebody reach out in response to an episode that we did talking about that, and he had some really thoughtful perspectives on. I see where the AQB is wanting to go, but here are some potential pitfalls that really ought to be addressed. And I was quite impressed. He was citing things like, one of the alternative pathways to experience that they're pursuing or considering is allowing an appraiser or an aspiring appraiser to write three, basically demonstration reports and get those approved through some entity that doesn't yet exist. But I would envision that being an appraisal institute type or some other organization that would be vetted by the AQB to allow for those. And he was saying, look, I'm not necessarily entirely opposed to that, but here are some potential pitfalls. What if they just have AI write the report? What if they just pay somebody else to write the report for them? What if, certain scenarios? So those things should be considered and vetted out. And I cite that just as an example of, I think, the thoughtful discourse that can take place and the things that I know that the AQB considers when putting these out there. So, that recently being extended is certainly something, that is top of mind. The We just had the passage of the Road to Recovery housing bill, which is impacting, housing and appraisers. There are a couple of appraiser sections on that specifically. I've written an article and submitted that to the NAA that, kind of summarizes a few of those changes. Things like altering the HUD's requirements that have for years prevented licensed appraisers from becoming FHA approved and able to do FHA loans. Law is now in place, but the administrative rules are not yet. So there's a pathway, maybe in short order, maybe not, depending on the speed of government, for licensed appraisers to get put on HUD's approved list and be able to start doing FHA work that they haven't been able to do for a long time. So, just an example, I guess, of some of the things kind of on my mind happening out there in the profession, all swirling around the adoption of UAD 3.6 and the evolution of artificial intelligence and other things that we'll get to. So, kind of a long-winded answer. My apologies there, but short answer is, yeah, there's a lot on my mind as far as things happening in the moment.
Okay. Jeff, your dad just joined us. Welcome, Craig. We appreciate it. And we're going to give you a chance to talk in a minute, but I've got a couple more things to say to Jeff.
Yeah, please do. He's more interesting than I am anyway.
Now, Jeff, you mentioned your humble podcast. Go ahead and plug it. Tell us
Well,
about
thank
your
you.
humble podcast.
Well, emphasis on humble for sure. However, we certainly enjoy doing it. You know, Mark Verrett and I have started the Market Moves podcast, and really talking on things that we just find interesting. It really around the intersection of the economy, the real estate market, and artificial intelligence. So, stuff that we'll be talking about today, Tim, are things that Mark and I ruminate about and have a handful of people that find it interesting, but it challenges us to research, to study, to try to stay abreast of what's going on out there, at the intersection of those topics. So I appreciate the opportunity to plug that.
Oh, well, it's a good program. I hope more people listen to it. It also has a sense of humor, which I sincerely appreciate. And then there's your dad, Craig. It's good to be with you. Thank you. I appreciate you coming on. And
Thank you.
it's if you ask for a list of Craig's qualifications, it goes on for about 47 pages. But we'll just say Craig has been on. Well, it's tough to say what Craig hasn't been on, but he's been doing this for a long time. He's licensed, state certified general real estate appraiser in 3 states, and very active, not only in the appraisal community but in his community as well. So, Craig, welcome. Now, Jeff, I'm going to ask your dad this question, and then I'm going to get back to you on another question. But if you want to elaborate on your dad's question, that's great. Craig, you have discovered that AI saves you a lot of time and a lot of effort. Doesn't you still got to do a lot of critical thinking, but it saves you a lot of time and effort, especially on the back end, the appraisal. And you were telling me recently that you have pretty much gotten a restricted appraisal report, not 3.6, but a restricted appraisal report, uh, pretty well down. And you give AI a data and a certain set of instructions, and then you let it alone for 20 minutes and you come back and bam, there's your report. Now, obviously, you got to read it and make sure everything's right. But is this the kind of thing, excuse me, let me rephrase. Is this the kind of advantage you think appraisers ought to take advantage of? Or is this something that has just come easily to you and is therefore pretty much your bailiwick?
Well, I think it's something that anybody can do. But the reality is that it doesn't happen overnight because it is an artificial intelligence. You do have to kind of train it to get it to be able to do what you want it to do. And occasionally it will still do things I don't want it to do in terms of outputs and things like that. But the more you use it, the more effective it is at doing these kinds of things. And it's pretty, it can be intuitive in figuring things out. But once you get to an output that you like, Tim, I think one of the things that those who are watching and looking to use AI, one of the issues that we encounter is by putting sensitive material into an AI chat bot, are we disclosing confidential or do we have run the risk of disclosing confidential information? And one of the things that I would encourage anyone who's using AI to do is number one, don't use a free version. That information is always available for training on other AI models. And you don't want to, if you're using it for anything other than just general questions and information, don't use it. Don't use a public one. Pay them $20 a month and get a private one, and then take the time to go in and make your settings so that the information is not available for public training. That it's yours, and it's interesting. You can go in and ask the ask AI, hey, I want to keep this information confidential. I don't want any of the information shared. What settings do I need to give you so that you won't do that? And it will do that. I think that's probably the very first thing that you need to do if you're going to use AI is make sure that you understand the limitations, what can be shared, what's available, what's not, and make sure that you're complying with your ethical obligations to keep your information confidential, especially the assignment results. But once you've done that, going in and finding, you write a report, and I've pretty much moved even on, unless it's a lender requirement to use a form, I'm not using a form. I prefer to do a more of a narrative write-up. And once you get to a point where you are using a narrative format, the AI becomes a real ability to leverage your time, because you can establish kind of an outline of what you want it to do, and then it really becomes a matter of collecting the information and assembling it, and then having it rewrite the material. And probably the models improve over time, and this most recent improvement has allowed it to put your output into a Word document. And so you can select the font, the size. If I use lots of tables. If I'm using tables, I can define what I want the tables to look like. And then once I've done that, uh, and it takes a while to get it to the point where it's getting the output the way you want it. But once you do that, then it will pretty consistently give you the results in an output that's very, very attractive and usable. And so I think that, like most things, there's a learning curve, and you have to figure out how to make it work. But once you do, it can be very useful.
Of course, I
You
gotta,
were There we
I
go.
gotta hit the unmute button. Yeah, silly technology that you got to put up with. All right, both of you have served on the state board, different times, but both of you have been on your state board. So, as you answer these questions, you're looking at those answers from a standpoint of you have been called upon to judge other appraisers, which is a gloriously terrible responsibility. Oh, and it pays so well too. But the point is, you don't look you don't look at an appraisal as just an object. You look at it as you look at the appraisal as an analytical exercise, and then you look at the report as a communications device of that analytical exercise. Given, and this question is to both of you, but we'll send this one to Jeff first. Given that you have been on a state board where you have to judge other appraisers, the is it really possible to write an appraisal that is going to tick every box on USPAP, or do you do the best you can within the time limit and the budget you've got and hope that you don't miss anything major? What do you tell appraisers when they ask that question, Jeff?
Well, I think that's a really good question, Tim. And even within USPAP, you'll find the language referencing, perfection is not attainable. I hope, and I always tried, I just recently rolled off the board, but I always tried to follow the golden rule in a sense, to try to judge others the way I would want to be judged when it comes to these things. Certainly, you need to be doing what you say you're doing in the appraisal reports. You need to be doing the best job that you possibly can. The reality and the practical situation is that a lot of times somebody doesn't like a value, so that's the reason for it getting turned in, and rarely, if ever, is that the reason that any action is taken against an appraiser. It's often for something that's easy to identify, where you missed something or you misstated something, in an appraisal report. The rare instances that in my experience, were when somebody was intentionally and fraudulently trying to misrepresent what they did to a client. I went and inspected this property when I really didn't. And then not only did I not admit that, but they then try to invent reasons or excuses as to why they did or how they did or something. And, those have resulted in losing licenses and significant fines. But that's the exception, not the norm. Most of the time, it was well-intentioned appraisers who didn't really understand, how to derive or support an adjustment, or forgot to report a transfer of a property that wasn't necessarily material to the outcome, but was a reporting requirement that they missed. You should do your best to not have blind spots in the appraisal reports. I, I never saw somebody have a significant disciplinary issue where there was a minor reporting issue that could have been overcome, that they acknowledged, that they cited, here's what I've done since then to improve that and to move forward. Our state in Utah is following what some others are doing, where they're offering a mentorship program. My dad's actually done some of those and can certainly speak to that. But an opportunity to fix what wasn't right and move forward, is, I think, better than pay us money and go take a class. And in our experience, a lot of the classes that are taken don't really address the core issue that caused the problem in the first place. And so, um, it's a challenging landscape. You want to protect the public's image and perspective of appraisers, and having poor quality work, work that can't be supported and defended, does not do that. So the boards play an important role in that that aspect. But I think there are more effective ways to help improve the overall quality of appraisal reports than just finding appraisers. And there are 50 different appraiser boards in the 50 different states. I guess a few of them don't have formal boards, but there's the point is just there are multiple perspectives from individuals that make up those boards and decision-making bodies. And some are much more punitive and aggressive than others, and some want to help correct the action and let people move forward, provided there's not fraud. So there's a lot to that, I think, in my mind, Tim.
Jeff, thank you. Craig, Jeff brought up the issue of mentorship. And Utah recently added a mentor program. And for those who don't know what a mentor program is, basically a chart or a complaint comes up before the board. The board looks at it and says, yeah, there's probably something here. We better look into this. And then the board says, well, yeah, appraiser, if we took this thing as far as we could, you'd probably get hit with some kind of serious penalty. But if you get a hold of Craig and you go through a mentorship with him, well, it is not inexpensive. It won't go on your record. And therefore, you will never have to say you've been charged by the state with in violating state law or violating USPAP. Now, we're both mentors in various states. And it's been my experience that it's been very positive. What has your experience been, Craig?
I think my experience has been is that all of the people I've worked with have been very, very teachable. I think that's the key part, is that if I'm an appraiser who wants to improve the skill set that I have, the mentorship program is the place to go. As Jeff had pointed out, too frequently, the problem we have is it's kind of the fine and take a class approach to dealing with these things. And the appraisers oftentimes have already taken the classes. They're getting, how many times have you taken the USPAP update? Well, every 2 years at least. And so taking it again is probably not going to solve the underlying problem. And I think maybe one of the challenges that we face is that it's hard sometimes to make the connection between the class or the concepts and into practice. And so what the mentorship program really does is it allows us to deal with how do I apply these concepts in the real world? I think we've all been in a class where they're showing you how to do paired sales, and the only difference is a 2-car garage versus a 3-car garage. And gee, the house with the 3-car garage sold for more. So you can pretty well isolate the influence of the garage. But in reality, that's not usually the situation we find ourselves in. You have multiple variables, all of which may or may not have an impact on value, and trying to isolate the influence of those things sometimes is not that easy. And so being able to go in and show someone how to use a sensitivity analysis coupled with paired sales, coupled with mass data analysis is something that many appraisers don't know how to do, or they haven't done, or we just don't even take the common sense approach of going through and explaining to our clients the logic, that we have. And so it's been really nice because we'll sit down and I try to meet with them in person, where we're sitting in front of a big computer screen and we're looking at an appraisal and going through and identifying the things that the state thought was a problem. And then we talk about, well, in retrospect now, what would I do different to try to avoid having this problem in the first place? And that's been a pretty positive, a pretty positive approach. And we've got some built-in tools that we generally use with some Excel spreadsheets in addition to the use of some of the AI tools that we have. And I think that when it's all done, the problem is that, and I think we all recognize that the method for becoming an appraiser is you're about as good as your trainer was. And if you have a good trainer, you do a pretty good job. And if you had a crappy trainer, maybe not so good. And a lot of these things just, I can't tell you how many times that, well, that's just the way I was told you do it. And less is more. Don't put too much in there. It's going to just trigger a underwriting question. Or we've got this proprietary adjustment table and you always adjust at this rate for that. And that's just not how the market works. And so as we kind of break down some of those barriers and get to a point where we can look at the logic, the data, and the writing ability to communicate, that's really what we're hoping to do so that we can avoid those kinds of issues in the first place.
As everyone can tell, Craig has a background in diplomacy. But Jeff, your dad raised the issue of paired sales, and a three-car garage, the house sold for $580, and a two-car garage, the house sold for $560. Therefore, the garage is worth $20,000. And while that is a wonderful teaching tool, as your dad also mentioned, that doesn't happen in real life. Now, you and Mark did a section on your podcast, Market Moves, relative to iBuyers. And you mentioned that, this is not taking over the country. There are some investment opportunities in residential housing under certain circumstances, which are not always easy to achieve. But if you got enough money and time, there is. So you've got an iBuyer out there who, I don't think it's a question. I think everybody pretty much knows that they've either got to buy at a significant discount or they've got to make their money up in the mortgages or consulting or something like that. So an iBuyer buys a house for a house with a three-car garage for $580. And everybody else has been paying a different price. I'm not going to say above or below, but a different price. So are iBuyers messing up the market? Yes or no, in your opinion? Is a purchase through an iBuyer an arm's length transaction? Yes or no, your opinion? And then if the appraiser decides that it is an arm's length transaction, can, for example, it be used to pair out the contributory value of a three-car garage versus a two-car garage?
Great series of questions, I think, Tim. Yeah, so the short answer on the front end, are they messing up the market? No, I don't think so. Now, there may be some markets where they're more prevalent. Part of the reason I say that is I don't see it being a dominant share of market transactions yet in most markets. Now, there have been some where Open Door and Zillow and others have been more aggressive. I think Phoenix is probably one where, they maybe have a higher percentage of the total transactions in the market, but I'm not seeing that, really take over the market. It's a really interesting business model, just as an aside. we all know there are a lot of frictions with selling a home. And if somebody comes along, and whether it's Zillow, Open Door, or someone else, and can solve the challenge of having to list my home and have a whole bunch of showings and worry about keeping it clean all the time for people to come walk through it and then not be there when people want to walk through it. If it were much easier to say, hey, I want to sell my home, and within a week it were sold at a fair price, the price I would maybe expect to get in the market, I can see it solving, what is a very slow and kind of fraught with friction transaction in the real estate market. So part of the reason for even following is just interesting to see, do they kind of like, Uber or, some other technologies provide a better way to do what we already do, throughout the course of our lives, buying and selling, residential real estate in particular. But, as it pertains to the other parts of the question that you've asked, because they are an institutional buyer and seller, I mean, and it's important, I think, to remember they're transacting on both sides of that equation. One of the things that Mark and I have looked at more closely is Open Door in particular, and their business model has evolved a little bit from try to buy low and sell high, resulting in primarily them buying homes that had problems, whether in condition or adverse external influences or something as the primary reason that they got the discount in the first place. They're intentionally trying to buy homes that don't have problems at a fair price to the buyer, and then make more of the money on promoting the mortgage, providing some of the services associated with that transaction in the first place, rather than just buy crappy properties and have a perception of, only owning and selling crappy properties. To the question of whether it's an arm's length transaction, I mean, really the way I think about it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, when you're talking about the relationship between the buyer and the seller, two things I think can be true. One, there may not be any relationship. So it may be arm's length in terms of the relationship of the Open Door seller relative to the buyer who's coming along to buy, or vice versa. And there may be, it may or may not be a typically motivated buyer or seller in that transaction. In fact, one of the interesting things with the transition to the UAD 3.6 report writing format that residential appraisers are going to is the definition in the comparables is evolving from arm's length or non-arm's length to typically motivated or not typically motivated. So kind of eliminating the assessment of the nature of the relationship between the parties and more analyzing, was the motivation on the part of the buyer and seller typically motivated or not. It remains to be seen a little bit whether there is motivation to sell homes quickly, therefore sell at a discount, or not. We see that in an REO situation. I haven't really seen that within the iBuyer space at this point, but I think what it all boils down to for me is understanding the nature of the data, verifying the comparable that you have. If it was exposed to the market and sold within the context of others, it probably doesn't matter that it was an iBuyer that had bought it and was then turning around and reselling it in the market. But I think it just emphasizes the need to understand the data, and really that's part of the appraiser's job. And I think what makes an appraiser uniquely qualified to add value in the marketplace, anybody can tell you what the home down the street sold for, and then extrapolate what they think that ought to mean for something else. But it's really the professional appraiser that can then analyze, well, okay, but what were the terms of that sale and how does it actually compare in terms of physical features and characteristics? That is where appraisers bring value in the marketplace, I think.
Jeff, thank you. Craig, one more question connected to this, then we'll start to wrap things up. Okay, Jeff was talking about iBuyers could be an arm's length transaction, could be typically motivated, but the appraiser is going to have to pick up the phone and talk to somebody to ask that question and therefore find out an answer. So, and Jeff mentioned the transition to 3.6. Especially its language of getting away from the old concept of arm's length into the more modern concept of traditional or typical. Okay, given that the appraiser, in order not to end up before a state board, is going to have to probably do a little bit more work, or excuse me, let me rephrase, in order not to end up before a state board or getting a Fannie Mae love letter, Craig, do you think that the reporting an appraisal on 3.6, which is pretty much a done deal? I mean, appraisers pretty much don't have a choice if they're going to do GSE work. Is that going to make um, is that going to make appraisal any more professional? Is it going to make writing an appraisal any longer? Is it going to relieve the appraiser of any communications responsibility?
I think the complaint that the GSEs have had is that we have not done as good a job of communicating the assignment results in a manner that is accurate and complete. And so, the problem, and Tim, I know you've seen this. I will see under 2.6, I will see an area where the form says identify any adverse uh, easements, other things, but there is no place in the form that is specifically identified as describing the site. And so if I've got a property that I think has a view that is better than, and so I'm saying, hey, this is a beneficial view of whatever it is. Where is the appraiser discussing that? Most frequently, it just doesn't come up. If the property, I've rated it as good quality and good condition, where am I telling my client why I think it's good quality and good condition? There's certainly some space within within there to do that, but not very much. And so the same thing with location and other things. And so the deficiency, I think, has been is that instead of, and personally for me, I just detest reports where I see the neighborhood description and it says, see the addendum. I see the site thing, I see the addendum. And everything is referring me back to an addendum where I'm trying to figure out why they thought it was a good view or a bad view or beneficial or adverse, and it's not. It's clunky at best, and usually deficient in terms of providing the level of analysis and description that ought to be there. 3.6 will help solve that problem if the appraisers will learn to take their time to do that. Now, I came out of a little bit more of a narrative background. And so even in the place where it talks about the adverse characteristics of the site, I will usually describe the site there. It's, hey, this lot is situated on the south side of the street. It's level, it's above grade, below grade. It's got a beneficial view of this, that, or the other, or it doesn't. And it's accessed by a public surface street or a private street that's owned and maintained by an HOA. I think providing that level, it's on a septic system. There is or is not a public sewer system in the area. I think that level of discussion is what will likely be required in 3.6. And so if you've been doing that before, it's just, it's not going to be an issue. And I think you're going to be looking at the same thing on the building descriptions. I think almost universally, appraisers have not done a very good job of, we tell the client what we did. I adjusted for this at this rate. Well, that's kind of already self-apparent, because you can figure it out by just looking at the adjustment. The question is, where did the number come from? And I think that's still going to be an issue that we are going to struggle with because it may be quantitative, it may be qualitative. I think the GSEs and the users of appraisal services just want to know why we did what we did or why we didn't do anything when it might appear to have some kind of a material influence on the property. And so I think that 3.6 will help to solve some of that. And, Jeff has done a couple of 3.6s and the software is not ideal at this point. And all of the AI technology that's supposed to exist doesn't right at the moment. And getting the photos in the right section is a little bit of a challenge. And, getting the software to where you get your auto adjusts working properly is a little bit of a issue with some of the legacy software providers, but that stuff will likely work itself out. The issue is really now how do I provide the accurate, detailed information and determine the influence on the market based on those characteristics. And that is why appraisers get paid to do the analysis, because you are going through and using your skill set and your analytical skills, which we hope we have, to be able to be able to give them an answer and help them assess the risk of the property as collateral.
Wait a minute. Appraisers get paid?
We hope. We hope.
Ideally.
Okay. All right. All right. Gentlemen, we're recording this at the end of July of 2026. Uh, and obviously, you're both fonts of appraisal knowledge and wisdom. Are you going to be making any appearances or making any presentations anywhere the rest of the year? Jeff?
So yeah, I will be at the Appraisal Summit in end of October, very beginning of November. We'll be, I believe, speaking a little bit about 3.6. My dad mentioned I've written a couple for clients on real live orders. So far by then, it will be far less novel than I think it is as of the time of recording. Also speaking with a couple of really interesting individuals about artificial intelligence and large language models. So looking forward to doing those. I think I am teaching a class for the Association of Texas Appraisers, ATA, in middle of August, I think. So that should be a good time. I think those are the two main things I have coming up through the end of the year, Tim.
Okay. Thank you. Craig, how about you?
I'm going to be down at the
Enjoying your
appraisal.
retirement too much.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm going to be down at the Appraisal Expo in Las Vegas in August, and I'm not presenting, but going to be there. So look forward to seeing anybody who happens to be there. I'm really kind of interested to see who has what in the way of software development, and I've worked with Andy Arledge on Freedom Appraisal, and he's a good friend. I think if he can get the GSE, blessing, that looks like it's going to be a pretty good option. There are a couple of pretty good options out there, but there's still a lot of bugs, and it's hard working through some of these things. And so it's been interesting, Tim. I do one or two classes for our local board of realtors. I developed a class that is for core CE for real estate licensing. I am teaching a class for a group of real estate agents. I developed a class on how to develop a value for real estate agents and got it approved as core CE. And so any of you that are wanting to try to expand your business reach and profile, that's a pretty good way to go. I get more referrals from real estate agents doing stuff because I teach classes at the board of realtors. That has had a huge influence. So if you're trying to expand your business, go get some classes approved and teach to your local real estate brethren, and you'll find out that that works out to be a very useful thing, and it's been a lot of fun. So we'll be doing that in October.
Okay, good. So, Jeff, you'll be at the summit in October, and you'll be in Texas in August. And then, Craig, you'll be at the expo in August, and then doing some other teaching, but it will be local teaching.
Right, right.
So, just so everybody knows, I know both of these men for many years. And if you walk up to them and say, "Hi, I got an appraisal question," you know what they're going to do? They're going to say, "Okay, let's sit down and talk about it." So, if you get the opportunity to meet Jeff or Craig, father and son, take that opportunity. Yeah, I met Craig just because I called him on the phone one day, 25 years ago, just to say hello. And Jeff, you were probably still in elementary school when that happened. But yeah, and then strangely enough, Craig took my call and we chatted for about 30 minutes. But yeah, take that opportunity. So, gentlemen, before we go, any other words of wisdom?
Just thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure as always to get together and kind of talk shop as far as what's going on out there. So I appreciate the invite. It's always great to connect with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, same.
Greg?
We love spending a little time on these virtual visits, and Jeff's a lot smarter and better looking than me, so he's the guy you probably want to talk to. But we're always happy to visit if you have questions.
Well, if we're going to go that far, y'all need to get your wives in here
Yeah,
and
that's
just
true. Absolutely.
just talk to them.
Yeah, they're
Um,
way more fun and better looking too.
yeah,
And they tell the truth
yeah.
about us.
All right, guys. Yeah, they will. That's the bad part. But we'll edit that out. So, guys, thank you. I appreciate it very much. And to all of you who took your time to watch, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Craig. If somebody needs to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
My Gmail is usually the best. It's valuepro@gmail.com. There's no E in value, so it's just VALUPRO@gmail.com. Send me an email and I'll try to get back to you.
Very good. Thank you. Jeff, how about you?
Yeah, probably as easy anything is on LinkedIn. Just my name, Jeff Morley, with some designations, but that's pretty easy. I'm interested to see how many people are reaching out and connecting, on that platform, especially of late. So that's probably the easiest way to get right in touch with me, Tim.
Okay, good. So through your LinkedIn page. Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. All right. Again, everybody, thank you. Get in touch with Jeff. Get in touch with Craig. And we appreciate your time. We appreciate your thoughts, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye bye.